Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is spent talking a little bit about everything, media, virtual production, any questions that you may have in Mukana, which you can find your way to via the officehours.global. And then the second hour is usually something we want to talk a little bit more about. Today, we're going to talk about live audiences and in events and how we manage that process. So, using a variety of tools. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit in the second hour. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do you got?
Well, we start off with an exciting one this morning. Aaron Husledge of Durham, North Carolina asks, has anyone seen Vienna's, our friend who was here a few minutes ago, is often in the panel, her definition of second hour at Urban Dictionary? And I pulled it up. If you'd like me to read it, Alex.
Go ahead and read Vienna's second hour definition in Urban Dictionary.
In Urban Dictionary, the technical posting in second hour definition is a topic with more questions than answers, requiring a group of nerds to discuss it for at least an hour. The term originates from Office Hours Global, a daily live stream panel discussion between media professionals. The second hour of the show is usually a deep dive into a specific topic. And here's her example. Person one, hey, did you hear about that obscure, highly technical feature that Apple released yesterday, which is available only in some countries? Person two, yeah, that's got to be a whole second hour.
That's great. That's a great definition. So very good. Very good. I don't know if we have any discussion about we don't have any discussion about in the site for maybe there's a whole second hour about the second hour. Go ahead, Courtney.
Did you notice it's posted by Vienna, Austria?
That's great. All right. Next question.
Thank you, Vienna. Bravo.
Yeah.
Let's move on. We're now going to Douglas Carmichael for our first non-self-referential question. And he writes, the TWiT, This Week in Tech, talks about opening their Eastside Studio in January 2022. Could ZoomISO rooms and Mukana supplant the in-studio audience in streamline production while increasing safety? And he says, I could even see using an XR stage or an LED wall for audience display.
I don't know if, I think Leo and I have different views of audience interaction. So, I think he likes to have the chat there, and he does like to interact with the Discord group. But I think that I like to drive the entire show with the audience. So I have a different approach to it in that sense. I do think that they've definitely thought a lot more. I don't know when they're going to bring back audiences. I think it was fun, definitely, to have a handful of people, but I think that given the current situation, it could be a long time. So there would be some opportunities there. Next question.
The next question comes from an irregular questioner, Alex L. in Novato, California. And Alex says,
you seem to be one behind. Okay.
No, there's an undefined up there. I was trying to figure out how to get rid of it. There we go.
Great. All right, great.
So anyway, I'm looking for a 24-port switch for my house. Does anyone have a recommendation?
I figured before I bought one, I would ask. Go ahead, Jason.
My very favorite is the Ubiquiti Pro line. So the Ubiquiti Pro 24 PoE is just fantastic. The backhaul is fiber. It's great.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, so I recently bought a bunch of networking gear for home, and I quizzed a whole bunch of people on Office Hours. I hit up Discord. I talked to people, and I got all sorts of different responses, but ultimately I was concerned about NDI and not that I'm doing much NDI, but just to make sure it worked, and Dante, and I went down the Ubiquiti Pro line, and I've loved it. I've had it now for a couple of months, and I'm super happy. I bought the Dream Machine router as well. I guess you won't need that, but they do play really nicely.
Now, what's the Dream Machine router?
So it's just a Pro router.
Just a beautiful router.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It also does the Protect line as well. And so you can do security cameras, but it basically handles the whole network management. And so then you can plug in the access points as well and get a couple of the Wi-Fi 6 access points. So all of that in that realm it just works awesome. But one recommendation I'd have, and this was a recommendation you gave me, and that was when I went to buy an SDI SDI router, you know, like the video hub, I got the 20 times the 2020, and you said
You'll need the 4040.
4040.
I did.
And so my recommendation is don't get a 24 port, get the 48 port. I got the 48 port, and I'm super happy. I've gone way over 24.
That's a good one. That's good to know. That's a good answer. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, same thing. I own the Ubiquiti Dream Machine Pro here, and I did wind up getting 2 of the 8-port auxiliary switches, and I maxed those things out, so I'd be getting more. If I had to switch today, I'd probably go over to some of the managed switches that are in the AV line from Netgear. These have Dante and NDI specific profiles that make it super easy to set that up. Otherwise, you will be learning a lot when it comes to setting up the Ubiquiti stuff as far as settings for IGMP snooping, multicast, ports, VLANs, all that stuff. This makes it super easy. So I'd explore these at least in your research.
And which one? What are they? The
AV managed. It's the 4000 line. For like this one's the 4250, 43. So they're all marked in that family as AV over IP installation.
Right.
So
very good. Go ahead, Rupert.
So +1 on the Ubiquiti stuff, and +1 as the Netgear as an alternative. I just thought it'd be worth mentioning on the Ubiquiti line. I think when we talk about Ubiquiti, we're specifically generally talking about the Unify range within that lineup, because they have other ranges too. And just on the Dream Machine type scenario, it's a great router, obviously, and a security gateway. It also acts as the controller for all of your Ubiquiti equipment, and you do need a controller. So if you don't have the Dream Machine, you'll need to run the controller in software on a computer. Perhaps that's one way of doing it, because out of the box, there's no way to manage a Unify switch on board. You need an external controller, either the Dream Machine or the software running on a computer.
Good, Jason.
I have one thing to add to that. That is correct if you want to access it from the public internet, if you want to access it away from directly inside. But if your router assigns an IP address to it, you can actually just go directly to that switch and get a GUI.
And to be clear, like to make it more complicated, I do connect to my office via Meraki. So what I need is just something internally to. I guess I could double NAT it to just have a router inside of the managed. Just the house, and it's mostly. I have to admit that I could be wrong. I might turn it into something more, but right now it's just mostly connecting all the things that need to talk to each other. I'm not pushing anything serious over it.
So you need something completely unmanaged, right? I mean,
I've thought about it, but I am prone to add Dante to things. So I've thought, well, maybe I should probably have a little bit more control. If I get an unmanaged switch, I'll end up throwing it away. So that's why. So I'll look at both the Netgear and the Ubiquiti. Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
yeah, one last point is if you're future proofing, make sure to take a look at 10G as well, because you can pop in some SFP ports and upgrade that way. But it might make sense if you're seriously going to go that way, which I think NDI is the future. I don't know what your thoughts are. I've heard in the past that you don't love NDI, but I'm loving it here. And 10G can saturate eight connections to one computer can saturate one gig very quickly. Like that's about the limit you're going to get on a 1 gig. So 10G is a thing. And you can even, if it's too expensive, you can go down to 5G. So little 5G adapters are pretty cheap as opposed to the 10G. So but you do need the 10G switch. So that's an option.
That's good. That's good. Grant.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I seriously looked at the Netgear and I kind of went down this whole line. But I guess it was because I wanted a managed solution. I was trying to work out how I was going to do a router, and then it didn't have enough ports for me. Like I was going to have to do more. And in the end, I'm super happy I went this way. I haven't done any configuration on it. I've poked around everywhere, but all the Dante NDI all works seamlessly over that, and it's been great. So I'm a big fan of it. The other thing is it has augmented reality on it. I don't know if you've seen that, but
with your phone, yes,
you get your phone out and it does like a little, kind of like a QR code off of the little display on it, and then you just hover over with your phone.
Shows you what your connections are.
Shows you every exactly what the connections are. Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
We've talked about what's connected to it.
we've talked about wanting that with a video router where I can just do augmented reality and just put my finger on it and have the video show up. Like this is what's going through the thing on this one would be pretty slick. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I mean,
it's pretty amazing. It does it with the router as well. So you kind of look at all of them in the rack if you had a bunch of them, and then it just works over all of them, shows you inputs out. It's super.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've thought about in my big getting a BSS 806 is kind of been the thought process in my little server room, and then a bunch of crown amps that will tie into it via the Blue network, and then a Dante network that ties into the rest of the house. Because there's in my house, it came with the house, I didn't install it, but there's like 37 speakers in the house, and so they're like in different rooms and everything else. There's 2 surround systems, and then there's stuff outside and everything else. And I was thinking I could just tie those all in, and then I could then I could unify them or separate them, and so I'm trying to think about that a little bit as I start to go through that. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, it's just worth noting, and some people report with the Ubiquiti system that Dante doesn't always play very well. Certainly, when we first deployed our system, it kind of killed our Ubiquiti. So it does take a little bit more time just to dial those 2 things together.
That makes sense. Next question.
Moving on, go to Douglas Carmichael, a frequent questioner here, and he says, what benefits do MCNs or multiple channel networks offer to a YouTube content creator?
Go ahead, Jason.
There are some SEO benefits if you have 2 very distinct kind of pipelines or subject matters of pipelining, 2 different channels. And I'm not the expert on this. I'm sure Jeffrey has more.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So yeah, I was part of an MCN for a little while. I actually, back when Blip TV was around, and then Maker bought it, we all just kind of moved with the crowd into there. But there was a reason why I went to Maker and not Machinima at the time was the other big one. So basically, an MCN, what it does is it gives you a person. In a good MCN will give you a person to actually come back to and talk about your advertising and talk about how your content is being molded and stuff like that. And that was the greatest thing about being on the Maker MCN is I had somebody to go back to, and we could kind of figure out what direction we were going to go from there. They take care of the advertising as opposed to YouTube taking care of the advertising. So that means that you didn't have to get that 60-40 split. You could get a 70-30 split or an 80-20 split, depending on how everything went. And then, of course, they threw you extra side projects. Like there was a couple, I did some pretty good stuff on that MCN at the time before PewDiePie just kind of blew the whole thing up. But there were a lot of side gigs that I grabbed from there. So there was a lot of hand holding to go for the MCN. But the problem is MCNs, they just fall apart super quick. And then next thing you know, you're just sitting there in the wind and wondering what's going on.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is again up next. In this case, he says, what affordable tools could you use to build a data-driven graphics for sports or other rapidly changing content? Could you use SPX-GC for that purpose? And for those of you who watched yesterday, we talked a little bit about this.
Good. Stuart?
Yeah, from what the creator was saying, yes, you can use SPX-GC for that sort of stuff. You can also use the onboard titler that comes with vMix. It will pull in sources from data, but I like shifting things across to multiple systems, again, to reduce the load on a PC. And it looks like H2R graphics will also support that sort of thing. I believe it's in both the early version and the new version.
Courtney?
And if you want to learn something that may create a marketable asset in yourself, is learn Unreal Engine, because they have UMG UI Designer, which they use in a lot of video game, gaming engine stuff to put real-time graphics on the screen with Unreal Engine, which you can download for free.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, and he talked about Rive, which I've been playing with in the last 24 hours, and that's a great data-driven type of graphics there. You can and I'm trying to figure out how you can put that into SPX as well. But you can get as simple as a Notepad++ and just do some coding from there. That's absolutely free.
And what is? I remember him bringing up Rive, but I don't remember what was the what was it? Was it Rive.io?
Yeah, let me grab it here really quick. I got it up. It's basically this this app that you can have fun little graphics put on. So
right.
I'm guessing little lower thirds, like this little guitar player right here. It could be a little lower third on your graphic, and then just kind of some text saying, "Hey, rock out to us," or I don't know, stuff like that.
And yeah, I mean, I think that any dedicated graphics machine has some way for it to look at a table and put information in real time. I mean, if it's anything that's mature, because that's a common problem, and so then it's just a matter of figuring out how to deliver those tables in a place that it can read them. Next question.
Moving on, Craig McFarlane in Boston, Massachusetts is up next. He asks, has anyone had experience with AVA for capturing transcripts or translations? And ava.me appears to be the link.
I just took a look at it. I have not seen it before. It looks really, really interesting. I'd be interested to see if there's a way for us to pipe that into a show, as opposed to, because it does look, for the folks listening, it's an app that lets you basically open your iPhone and look down, and you'll just be able to see the text of what people are saying. So it's doing live transcription for it. It'll be as accurate as the quality of your audio and the quality of how the person talks. But it could be something that's a really interesting another way to find live transcriptions, in a relatively easy way. So yeah, I haven't used it yet, but I'm going to do more research. If people want to bring them on, if you hear this and you think it's interesting, put it in the second hour and vote on it, and we'll see if we can reach out to them. Next question.
The next question from Douglas Carmichael again. This time he says, in marketing materials for the ABBAtars, ABBA, ABBA show, they mentioned that ILM has 500 to 1,000 artists and 4 studios on the project. Could the Rebel Mac model, small cross-functional teams without excessive bureaucracy, succeed in today's environment?
I think it actually does. There's an enormous amount of work that's done by smaller teams. There's big jobs that require something like ILM and so on and so forth, but there's an enormous amount of educational work, even broadcast work, that is being done by smaller teams on desktop platforms. That's I would probably say the majority of in raw terms of time of the amount of animation and everything else. It's the majority of it's done by individuals. And then there's just a handful of very large firms that do really complex projects like this one. Next question.
Grant Whitehead in Adelaide, Australia, and here on the panel today says, my kids' school are buying some cameras for still photography, but also for live streaming through an ATEM. They've been recommended the Canon 1500D. Is that going to work?
I'm just going to always come back to, you're kneecapping yourself if you don't get a Blackmagic camera for a Blackmagic switcher. I mean, it's just like once you buy the switcher, you're kind of in the thing, and it just really lowers what they can do, by a dramatic
about
turn.
Still photography though.
It does still photography. I will say it's not the most amazing still photography tool. The problem really is feedback. It takes fine photos. It just doesn't click. Like there's no feed. Like you push it and it does something. And I think it's so that you can quietly take pictures while you're doing video. So if you're taking video and you want to take a picture of that person, you can just tap it and it won't make any noise. It won't do anything else. But it feels weird when you do it. Like there's no real feedback there. And that's my main complaint with it. It's not, the photos come out fine, as far as that, especially if I was teaching kids. But yeah, go ahead.
Is there a half press on it?
Did you have it? Oh, you froze. I think you froze, or you're really good at being very still. We'll come back to you.
Is there
Who froze?
Or maybe I froze.
Yes, you look frozen in my screen. I'm live and I can see everybody else moving. So it looks like it's on your end. Oops, and now your audio is gone. So I'm going to assume you're having some sort of network problem, and we'll pick it up.
Can you hear me now?
Now you're back. You just came back.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I woke up this morning without any internet, and then I restarted my router and it was fine, but maybe I may have some storms, so we'll see. So what were you gonna say, Grant?
So I was gonna say, does it have a half press? Like with the autofocus on the Blackmagic
I don't
camera?
know. I've never tried that. Yeah.
No.
But kids should learn how to. I just want to point out that I learned how to do it with manual. Like I was K1000. They should learn how to actually focus.
Yeah, and film as well, right?
Yeah, like it's but the I think that again, if it just depends on, I think that they have to think about how much they're going to do more of one thing or the other. but wow, does it's so hard. I mean, I occasionally hook up cameras that are non-Blackmagic cameras to a ATEM switcher, and I just feel like my legs have been tied together. Like I just can't get anything done. Because there's so many tweaks that you're doing constantly once you know how to do it. Go ahead, Bill.
All of the things Alex is saying are absolutely true about the video side of it. But for still photography, I still think that a camera, if they're trying photography to learn that, a sync port that manages external flash is the most important thing for a photographer if they want to get really serious about it, because that's how you manage light in a still fractions of a second environment. So without a sync port, you're really hobbling your ability to learn stills.
And I have to admit that I've never used the sync in my entire life. Ever. I hate the look of flashes. So I hate that sourcey look. And so I've literally never actually done it. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, the M50 Mark II, which is what you're seeing me on now, is a little bit cheaper than the 1500D, and it's a micro 4/3, but it takes all the MFT lenses, works as a good still camera, and I've been using it as a autofocus video camera for streaming here, and it seems to work quite well.
I think also my leaning towards that will be that they'll want to shoot video more than they'll want to shoot stills pretty quickly. And then they have a great video camera that's shooting in RAW and able to do a lot more, and I think most of the kids will move to video very quickly. Like they'll take stills like, okay, that's cute. And then they'll start shooting video. That's been my experience working with kids, is that if they want to shoot stills, they have a phone for that. So, literally like when it comes to framing and learning all the things about cameras, your phone is pretty useful in that area if you're just training them to do that. Next question.
Alex Hell from Novato, California. Has anyone seen any good NAB scheduled announcements?
Go ahead, John.
So the only one that came across my radar was the Sony press conference, was 2 days ago. And here are the 4 central themes. They showed a new 4K camera, HDR. Most everything they showed was had IP interfaces on it. They had some new cloud services that they showed. They bought some company, I can't remember the name, maybe Guy knows. And then they showed some pretty cool AI stuff where they were able to turn like sporting events people into bones, and then they were able to recreate it like in a 3D Unreal Engine, which was pretty cool. But very mediocre production value. It looks like they put it together in a couple weeks. So that's the only one I've seen.
They also showed a new drone, didn't they?
They did show a drone as well, yeah.
Guy?
Yeah, it looks like somebody's taking on some of the recommendations that you were mentioning, like starting to do weekly lives instead. So Lumix, this is one where they're starting to say every week we're going to make the announcements here. So they're showing off the new box camera that was just announced. And then I just got some emails as a reseller showing that the new stuff's coming out in webinar form. So these are a few weeks away. The webinars are a few weeks away, but like this one's interesting, the future of technology webinar. And when you sign up, when you hit register, register, you can see who the speakers are. And some of these guys you might know, they're pretty big deal guys. But it's cool to see that they're not just doing a one-time splash. They're actually doing ongoing events instead of via webinars, instead of just one big announcement. They're leaking the stuff out, dripping it out over time, which I think is more effective and is something you mentioned in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So yeah, Sony was part of the NAB Amplify, and Haivision also was part of the NAB Amplify for that week. I don't think there was a couple others, but they weren't about announcing anything. They were about classes and things like that. Sound Devices put out the A20 Mini version 2.0. I think that happened that week. Other than that, I have a couple things that are under NDA that I can't talk about, but they're going to be coming up in a couple weeks from now rather than at NAB. So they use the platform to just simply use the mailing list for that, is my guess. But yeah, other than that, nothing big.
Yeah, the ones that I've seen go by so far, AJA has a new disk management, what's called AJA Disk Over Media Edition. So it's disk data management software. So they are they did a big announcement. I think it was yesterday or the day before that they talked a fair bit about that, and also the new bridge that they have, which is their big encoder. has NDI support. so it's NDI support and HLS support. So that was a big announcement. We'll see if we can get them on to talk about that a little bit. And then Everetts did an Everetts.io, which is a kind of production in the cloud. So they're kind of moving down that path as well. But that'll be really pricey. Like it's outside of probably even my budget. So, but it's interesting to see how a lot of the big players are looking at cloud production. So that's what I've seen so far. But yeah, not as many. I was curious. I hadn't seen as very much, and so I was very curious as to whether I was missing something. Like, is there some place that I missed it? But it seems like everyone kind of just decided they're going to start announcing it. And I think this is going to be the hard part, is once they get used to announcing things in different times, it'll be hard to go back, I think, to make that work, because I think it's going to be more effective to do things over time. The big problem that they have is that, again, the production values for most of these announcements have been pretty low, and for no good reason. There's a bunch of us that know how to do this, and so I think they're having their event companies do their events, or they're doing them themselves, and neither of those are great solutions. So hopefully they'll figure that out. Jeffrey,
I forgot to mention PepCom is actually today, so
at 8 o'clock or
not
something,
as much
isn't it?
NAB. No, actually, it's at about noon my time, so 10 o'clock your time,
Okay.
and it's not going to be as much NAB focused, more as consumer stuff.
Yeah. Next question.
Scott Mueller's up next from Germantown, New York, and Scott says he wants to run concurrent Zoom meetings, one main meeting, 3 others, getting feeds from the main meeting with Q&A AV between the meetings. I have one ATEM Mini and one Extreme ISO. I'm set with a Dante audio mixer, but how best to route video to all these meetings?
Grant.
I was just still trying to process the question, but we run concurrent Zoom meetings all the time, and we tend to use Dante is awesome because once you get the virtual sound card on each machine, then in it goes and makes that really simple. And then a series of I move away from NDI where I can, unless I'm doing it in the cloud. And so I use a series of Magwell USB, HDMI to USB converters, and SDI to USB. And then I've also got a bunch of the web presenters as well. And so I'm just making sure I was covering off all those questions. We do a bunch of the ISO, so we use Zoom Rooms for that as well. And the funny thing about Zoom Rooms is that it actually has Dante input built in, not output. But you don't have to use DVS to get Dante input into a Zoom Room. You can just enable it. But then we get the 3 outputs, and then you can do gallery view across if you've got more than 100 and whatever it is, 3 times 47 or 49. So you can get 3 different distinct gallery views, and then of course you can pin and have 2, kind of like a typical video conference system where you can have 2 active speakers, which the 2 active speakers is very helpful if you're doing a 2-up, because you can now bring that into a production switcher and do 2-up, and those 2 screens will change automatically with the last 2 people that have spoken, which is a really cool feature in Zoom Rooms. It makes it easy to switch a show.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I almost want to draw this out to wrap my mind around it, but he's got 2 webcam outputs with the ISO, and then he's got another webcam output with the ATEM Mini. So that's 3 outs right there. So if you scrape, like let's say you grab a laptop and you just take an HDMI out of the laptop and plug it in, and then route that feed out again as your output into the other ATEM. So now you've got 3. So it's ATEM Mini 1 is a webcam output. ATEM Extreme ISO is 2 outputs. So that's 2 more PCs. So you're going to need a bunch of computers essentially to join those other Zoom meetings to get that video feed in. And then it sounds like he's got Dante handling the audio. So yeah, it can be done because you've got 3 webcam sources. You just need to get one laptop running the or an iPad. I've used an iPad in the past for an HDMI out. So
next question.
Nigel DeSalle here in the panel from Austin, Texas, says ATOMOS has announced their Ninja Cast, which would appear to be aimed at ATEM Minis. What does the panel think, and which might you use when?
Go ahead, Jason.
I'll answer the last one first. I would use this first if I already had the ATOMOS Ninja V or 5, I don't know how it's pronounced, for straight up just, cut bus, straight switching. Yes, I know it can do, overlay, but I would never do it on that kind of a touch interface. My second thought with respect to the ATOMX Cast, it only gives you webcam output. It is, it's not actually an encoder. It doesn't give you direct output. So it's, I don't know, it seems a little bit half-baked. If you're going to have something that's really, really portable, I immediately think, why not give a network out?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, pretty much everything that Jason just said. It's small and portable, as you can see here, but it seems more like just a cut switcher. It says it can do overlays. I haven't seen it work yet, but and I don't know how if there's adjacent, if there's provided software that lets you access and control it over the USB or not. It doesn't seem to have a network connection on it.
I think that if you already have the monitor, because it shows a lot with the monitor, but it doesn't come with the monitor. It's a dock for the monitor. So we have to remember that. And I think that the hard part to get into this market is the ecosystem. The cameras, the software, the API, all the other things that are tied into that ecosystem, and the fact that there's already a lot of people using the ATEM Minis. So I think it's interesting. I do think that there is definitely a place for it as far as a simple, like, I just want to cut between things, at a church or a wedding or sending to screens. If I didn't know better, I'd probably buy it. If I already knew that the ATEM had already worked with the ATEM, I don't know if I'd go, I should get this instead. Go ahead, Mitchell.
If I was running out of inputs on my ATEM Extreme and I was using ZoomISO, I might consider it to pre-switch.
Yeah, but the issue is that without the API, you can't really take that to an advanced level. So if you want a pre-switcher, what you really want to do is then be able to tie that back into companions. So if you have multiple switchers, you want to say, I want this input, but I want to be able to change. I want to, you could put 8, you could, or sub out, 6 or 7 sub switchers for your main switcher to add MEs. But the problem is that now you have to hit 2 buttons at the same time. So what you want to think about is if you need the API, because what you want to do is tie it back to companion that says, if I want my third switcher that feeds into my Extreme, if I want input 4, I want it to switch to that input in the main switcher as well as the one down below in one key press, and that's the and it could even be, I could just touch the switcher that I'm working on, and it automatically takes the main switcher to where it needs to go. Those are all functionality and logic that you can put into something with an ATEM. It's not something you can do with something like this. Like, you're getting, again, outside of the ecosystem. That's the challenge, and I got to say that, it's, yeah. So, and Mix Effect Pro, changes the switch. Like, it literally changed everything for how we view, at least the extremes, with the super sources. It literally transformed everything about the switcher value, in that area. That program, quadrupled the value of the switcher, in one fell swoop. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas is up next, and he says the October 13th Zoom release notes list a few updates to Zoom for Blackberry. What are the panel's thoughts or memories of Blackberry?
Stuart.
Well, my Blackberry finally died about 2 months ago. So I bought them when it came out with the playbook. The playbook is still running. It is still faster and snappier in response than any of the Android tablets I've got sitting around here. Frankly, I found them to be reliable and dependable, and they just worked. And the other thing is, everybody said, the Blackberry, it's so plasticky compared to the iPhone. That had an advantage for me. When I dropped it 5 meters from a man lift onto concrete, it bounced rather than smashing the screen.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, so it's actually like an app for iOS and Android, and it's an enterprise mobile user management system for apps. And so BlackBerry, like, well done to them trying to pivot into doing apps and still in the enterprise market and moving out of hardware. But yeah, so surprisingly, they must have a whole bunch of enterprise customers that use this particular mobile management. But it is an interesting thing, I think, with Zoom in general. You can see often where we're using it outside of enterprise, but the bulk of their market is enterprise. And so many times when we look at their release notes, it's like all of this, group management, group policy updates and this and that, all these things that are totally right in the middle of enterprise. Right. And every now and again they throw us a bone and you can now do breakout rooms in this way, or whatever it is. So thank you.
Yeah, for the 1%. Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, sorry about that. My biggest memory of BlackBerry was the way that they completely lost the market so fast. By the way, Losing the Signal is a great book if you've never read it about BlackBerry. But the way that I was told that BlackBerries would never, ever take over, would never lose the enterprise, all ended when the first CEO went in with their iPhone and said, connect that to the email system. And that consumerization can happen so fast.
Yeah. Bill?
The last thing I remember reading that was holding BlackBerries into some of those things, this is based on what Grant's talking about in the enterprise, was that there was a really robust security suite. In fact, I remember reading a story that in the early days of the Obama administration, they had to take everybody else's except for the BlackBerry, and they would allow one for the president just because they felt confident with the security suite stuff behind that ecosystem, and they didn't feel they could do that on other phones the same way. So there's those niche things that in the past have made a difference.
They thought it was secure. And then the I mean, it was pointed out to me by a friend that you don't see a lot of FBI jumping up and down trying to get into a BlackBerry. So anyway, so it may not be as secure as we think it is. They held. You were able to manage the servers. That was the big thing, is being able to manage the servers. But the thing is that the keyboard was so powerful, like it was such a big thing, the BlackBerry keyboard, and they just couldn't transfer. I actually worked on a project that involved the first screens, full screen BlackBerries that didn't have and they didn't understand that experience, and so it was like when they tried to get rid of the keyboard, it literally, and you see this in companies where they just got into a world that they didn't understand, how would you get to something, this to that, and getting to where you wanted to go on the open screen without the keyboard, it just was a horrible experience, and so it was, and that was really the problem, is that you have to get it right. And that's one of the things that, I don't think Apple gets it right all the time, but you get the impression that they spend a lot of time on it. Like they're not, there's nothing that they wing, and there's a thought process to it. You get frustrated by some things here and there, but most of the time it's pretty clean because you have to. As soon as a consumer doesn't have a clean experience, they're gone. They'll if there's another solution that's smoother, that's the real challenge. Next question.
Comes from Stephen Bauer in Seattle, Washington. He says, I just purchased Afttershokz Bluetooth headphones, and they're not working to listen to Zoom, even when selecting them in Zoom audio settings. They do work with all the audio coming from any other app like Safari on my iMac. Any ideas what could be going on?
I would only wonder if the volume on the Zoom setting is turned up, internally at Zoom, because I can't think of why. My first thought when I first scanned the question was that it was just you hadn't selected it in Zoom, but you obviously have. I don't know why you wouldn't be able to get it there, unless some other app is taking over. Like there could be another app on your phone. I mean, the only thing I would do is try to restart, make sure that nothing else is running on your computer, and see if Zoom can see it. Go ahead, Grant.
I don't know if you use Audio Hijack, but or Loopback, but I'd give that a little try and see if you can I kind of manipulate it and just see if it's not liking the sample rate or something from it, that it's not connecting that way.
Right. It's very interesting. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next. He says, Charles mentioned returning to, quote, bringing clients into the studio. With the tools we have now, could the efficiency and cost advantages of distributed or remote workflows mean the death knell for most in-person workflows?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, to sort of put it in perspective, what used to take millions of dollars of equipment, thousands of square feet, and hundreds of people in a physical environment is what production used to be, and that's gone. I mean, those days are gone or dying off. Nowadays, it's more of a collaborative type thing. So people aren't sitting in their room by themselves anymore producing pieces. They're collaborating in whatever way they can. And with the cloud and with what you're seeing right here, collaboration is the key in the future. So you kind of answered your own question. Yes, the future is collaboration, and the cloud is probably going to make it all happen.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I don't know. I may take a different view. It may be changing, but when I was working more in advertising commercials, if you're in a production situation in Los Angeles or New York, the agency and the clients always love to fly in, and on set all day, you wouldn't hear them talking about the product or the spot or the production or anything like that. They were discussing where they were going to eat and where they were going to, where they shopped on Rodeo Drive last night and what they got. So they look at it as a little paid vacation, and I don't think they're going to want to give that up.
I think that the hard part is that the challenge really is that the CFOs are starting to see the savings and starting to see that process. And so I think that the folks that are doing the numbers are realizing that may not make as much sense as it used to. So I think that you're absolutely right, Courtney, that there's a lot of people that like to do the little vacations. We had one client that we always knew that we were in a city that they liked because they were there. Like we would do stuff all over the world, but suddenly they were there to help with the shoot, even though that was 80% of the shoots they didn't show up. But if we were in London or if we were in Paris or Tokyo, we knew that they would definitely be there. And so they'd always show up, in the morning a little hungover, and so but it didn't matter, and they really enjoyed it. But I think that I've managed probably in the last 18 months, I probably managed $2 million of production where I never met anybody, like in person. We finally met some of them in person in a walkthrough for something, but we almost never actually interacted in almost all all the work. Now there is definitely work that I have to do that I have to show up because it's at a venue and there's a band or there's a thing or something like that, but it's not but so much of our production, I just finished a whole production. I've never met the people that I worked with and didn't have the same, so I think that I don't think that it's gone. And I think that in Charles's position, his studio matters because you have to look at color. So I think Charles probably needs a studio that people can go to. But I think that for the vast majority of stuff, the idea of being in the same place was something we were hanging on to, but it's not something we needed. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, there's a weird little personal anecdote, but I spent 10 years writing for a magazine. I had never met any of the human beings. I had spent 10 years contributing monthly columns, working with editors, doing everything remotely, virtually. And then I got into a situation where I was going to resign my column and the account. It was a conflict with a sponsor thing. And my wife told me, she said, go, get on a plane, go to where they are, and do that in person. And sitting around the table with the people, even though I had been dealing with all these people for 10 years, having the lunch beforehand, and then sitting down to tell them, I've got this opportunity over here, so I'm saying goodbye, but I felt I should do that in person. Mm-hmm. I think that was exactly the right thing. I think she was 100% right. There are certain things that you want to be in the room for so you can read the room, read the body language, get a pat on the back for your work or give a pat on the back for somebody. So overall, I agree with Alex that most of this stuff, it works better digitally, but there is still a place for that person-to-person contact that really is kind of hard to replace entirely.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next. And Douglas says, Nick Jushchyshyn was a PCX success story as he built his career from the experience in the PCX. And then
PXC, that's Pixel Core. That was the short for Pixel Core. Yeah, but PXC was our initials.
Could similar stories come from the office hours community is the basic question.
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, behind the scenes, there's an article being written right now for a major trade publication, and I think we're starting to see the what do you call it? The swell, the ground swell, like people, Tony Mobley, Jonas Dattel doing Play Out B, John Barker, Richard with Belfast Method, I think, and Grant with doing the stuff with Blue. A lot of this stuff is just gonna, it's the initial like stomps, and now it's just gonna start to pick up steam as soon as we do Office Hours 2.0. Alex opens up his LinkedIn network. We'll probably see a little bit more eyeballs come into town, and then it's just whatever the audience resonates with. I mean, Tony, he's got a pretty good show. Like last night's Todd Reynolds went really well, and I think that he's a superstar in his own right. He doesn't have huge numbers, but that's okay. And I think that once somebody here is going to pick up and really lift off. I mean, because we've got the technology, it's just a matter of how to amplify it.
Yeah. I think that it is. I've very purposefully not tried to get, been almost difficult to talk to about it, mostly because I just wanted us to mature as a community. I think that there's a lot of pressure to what happens next, and so we just have to make sure that we're ready for that. But yeah, as we get 2.0, and it could be a couple months of 2.0 before I start turning on all the afterburners. So it's I haven't flipped all those switches yet, but I want to make sure that we really look and feel like a broadcast. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, in Sunday session, former Pixel Core member Doug Dalton was doing a post-production world session, and somebody asked a question, where can I learn more? Where's the best place to learn online? And he said Office Hours, and I was like, whoa, holy cow, this is like hundreds of people at one of the premier events for our industry. I mean, NAB is 120,000 people, and so all those people are getting the info, hey, come to Office Hours. And
Doug's an old Pixel Core member. So he's in, and I've worked with Doug for years. So it's the society, the quiet society that's kind of embedded, woven into a lot of networks. So our old Pixel members, and now old Office Hour, becoming veteran Office Hours. Next question.
Stuart Fairweather, Melbourne, Australia, here on the panel is up next. Can anyone name a secure V-lock mount for using a V-lock battery under a drone?
What kind of drone are you putting a V-lock on, Stuart?
I've got a F550, which is a hexacopter. That's a little bit bigger than a Phantom, so it's big enough to carry a small DSLR or a mirrorless. And I'm just thinking I'm better off using a regular V-lock battery that I can use on multiple things rather than having a bespoke battery just for the drone. So
are the weights equivalent for the drone battery and the V-lock? Because I don't know of a V-lock battery that I would think is lighter.
A V-lock battery is a lithium. It's a lithium-ion battery, so it's the same chemicals in the regular 18650 cells. For a regular drone, the cell is just laid out flat and it's in a polymer coating. So you get a little bit of a weight advantage for the drone batteries and whatever, but connectivity and charging and all of that sort of stuff, I've already got all the stuff for V-lock batteries.
The only thing I would say is the configuration, though, is important. so the configuration of a V-lock battery is going to change how the weight is distributed. The flatness of that battery is, I think,
That's
pretty
easy enough
important.
To adjust underneath.
Go ahead, Courtney.
You just said basically what I was going to say. I don't know where you'd put it, because if you lock it on the back, it'd make it back heavy. There's not really room to put it on the top, because if you have stock.
I mean, the hexacopter is
put it underneath between the legs.
And underneath between the camera and the gimbal.
Yeah, the hexacopter can absolutely lift it. I
know it can lift it, but I'm talking about the center of gravity, like Alex was talking about.
This is the big challenge we've had with cameras on larger birds, is that the issue that we have is the weight distribution and trims of being able to fly it. As you move away from that center of mass, we end up with the bird kind of you get into it's not so much that it wrecks, although I have wrecked one because of that. So I tried to put it was actually a pretty simple thing. I just put a Theta onto a Phantom and, hung it to where it created a chain reaction that was not the last flight for that Phantom. So, but as you move the center of mass away, in any way, shape, or form, it just doesn't perform very well, because it's now correcting for that added trajectory. And we've had that problem with Reds as well, because they're heavy, reds and those are on octocopters, and they're big and they can handle it, but you end up with it's harder to keep them as stable, especially in any kind of wind. Go ahead, Bill.
Just for camera power, the V-Lock used to be all big batteries, but there is a smaller form factor battery now. And I think with lithium polymer being lighter weight, there may be a possibility that you're going to go there and you'll find something you could succeed with. So I'd keep pursuing it.
I'd be really scared of putting a V-Lock battery in the air. It seems like a deadly combination. I'd probably look at an Anton Bauer before I did that, and I'd probably then have to figure out how to restrain it in a couple different ways. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, there is a lighter weight battery that is a V mount, and it's the Hawkwoods. Yeah, these things are just the same watt hours, just in a smaller form factor. So I would take a look at these because then it's less to secure and less weight. So hawkwoods.com or .co.uk.
Next question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Grant.
It's just an observation. There's sometimes I listen to you, Alex, and I think, gee, you're cool. You're just a cool guy. And today you've come out with this term, drones, birds. Putting on the bird. I'm like, all right, I got to use that now. That's my next cool term to use.
I didn't make that up. That was a drone operator called it
the bird. Doesn't matter. You're cool because you used it.
Okay. Next question.
Rupert McCrae, Dallas, Texas, is up next. Is fiber termination a worthwhile skill to have? What kind of time and money would it take to learn and get equipped for that?
Go ahead, Stuart.
I actually got trained on how to weld fiber optic when I was working in broadcast. Yes, it's a useful skill. And as we get rid of more and more copper for home use, fiber termination is going to become more important. It's actually not as complex as people think. A lot of people think of it, it's so different, so it's got to be difficult. It's not. It's probably easier to do than terminating a Cat5 correctly because it's less fiddly. But you do need the proper tools, and it must be done under very clean conditions.
I think it's great. I think the termination kit that I have is probably $3,000 of hardware. I think that was there was choices between like 500 and 10 grand or something, and I picked like the $3,000 range of it. And I haven't done it for a long time, but I have it there, and it is easier than Cat5 in my opinion to do, and it's a useful skill. And as said, it's keeping it clean is important, and then having the right tools to diagnose whether your final connection is good is great, because in my opinion, you just run you run TAC12 to everything, even if you only need one. Just do TAC12, and then knowing that you're going to be able to terminate it is important, because then you just add the ones as you need them. Keep the other ones just covered until you're going to figure out whether I need an LC or a ST or SC or whatever else you're going to put on it. I'm a big ST. So anyway, go ahead, Bill.
For this one.
Did you had your?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was hitting the other one. I'm bad. Miscue.
Next question.
For the China question, Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, is asking, will China shut down iPhone production?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Okay, I'm going to be brutal. Ignore the politics. The politics are bunk. They mean nothing about it. Yeah. Every time somebody anywhere around the world buys an iPhone, money goes back to China. They see that as an income source, and they're not going to burn that, because it means everybody else is in debt to them. So everybody else will end up owing them money or owing them favors and whatever, and they will use it. So no, they're not going to worry about shutting down one brand because of politics.
Go, Jason.
Yeah, not a chance.
Yeah, Bill.
Same thing.
Nigel.
One minor thing, my old Chinese team used to say to me, in China, some laws are for passing and some laws are for following. Don't get them confused.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that China's already in a precarious position, that the instabilities between the United States and China have these companies looking for other places to build their hardware already. So they're all diversifying away from China, and so they're putting them in Vietnam and in India and in South America and everything else. And so they're already in a position where they can lose the cash cow that kind of keeps the country growing. So creating more instability is probably not in their best interest in the long term. But it's an interesting time for them, right now, and we'll see how it goes. I don't think China is as stable as a lot of pundits think it is. Next question.
Chris Marshall in Michigan, Bloomfield Hills to be specific, says, I'm considering GoPro 10 or Insta360 One-R as an action camera for skiing. Are there any other recommendations?
I would probably lean towards the GoPro myself. I think that for skiing, it's a pretty good one. I don't know. The Insta360 is kind of cool because you can pan it inside of it. But I think that the GoPro it's a real standard and it works really well. I don't have a 10. I think the last upgrade I think I bought is a 6, but I have a lot of them. Go ahead, Stuart.
There's also, in the similar vein of GoPro, RunCam make a whole range of cameras that are packaged similar that have a very good, and they have some pretty good stabilization. DJI's Osmo action camera is also very good, and it's actually easier to put filters on the front of, and in skiing, with all the light reflected in a clear day, you're going to need filters.
I don't know if I would take the Osmo out on a ski route, though. I mean, there's too much moving mechanical things that would bother me unless I'm looking
on
at
the
the wrong
Osmo
one.
action camera.
Oh, the action camera, right. Okay, I was thinking the little Osmo, little handheld one. Next question.
Comes from Stuart Fairweather in Melbourne, Australia, and here on the panel, ASMR performers on social media platforms make no sense to me. Why do the mics look like a pair of ears on a stick?
I think that those are the, go ahead, Bill.
To the extent I understand ASMR, and I don't delve into that much, but I've heard it in voiceover community, it is a process that helps in relaxation and things like that. Generally, those performers kind of whisper. And the whole point of that is to put somebody in kind of a psychological calm space. So if it's a pair of mics, they probably are trying to do a binaural recording that makes that even more realistic. That would be my guess. That's as much as I know about that side of the world.
Yeah, a lot of the binaural stuff that is done is oftentimes they put ears on heads to block it so that you hear it in the same way that you would hear that a human would hear it, because the head is actually blocking the far end of the audio, and it times it better. So, and I think that even Sennheiser makes ones you can put a headphones on and it'll record the stereo, but it uses your own head. You hear it and it uses your own head to block it. And that changes the timing of how it reaches the far ear. So, and the timing is how we derive direction. So, when we block the microphone, it is a very different experience to listen to something recorded with a head in between, as opposed to two microphones that are at ear distance. They're almost identical. You put the head in between and you suddenly have directionality that you didn't have before. Next question.
Brian Williams in Ridgewood, New Jersey says, what recommendations are there for remote video recording of extremely non-tech interviewees? I've looked into Zencastr, Remotely FM, Socialize. Any experiences? We need for them to hear an interviewer, and quality is important as always.
Go ahead, Grant.
You won't be surprised that I would suggest Zoom. The thing is that most people, even people that are non-techie, have had some sort of experience with Zoom, and you could do a cloud recording of it. You could do a local recording on your end. The whole thing is that it makes it easy for that end user, and we're constantly having contributors that are non-techie, older people, and they have no problems getting into Zoom, and you can explain it really easily. And then ultimately, I think the noise reduction and the echo cancellation in Zoom, I don't know, I think it's second to none. I think they've done exceptionally well on that, and that's just going to help when you have no control over the other end.
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, Riverside.fm would be one that is a local record at the far end, so you will get a little bit better color out of it, because Zoom's codec will beat things up depending on what account you have. But I would also suggest Zoom, if you could find somebody that has a 1080p account or get the upgraded 1080p, that's where it's at, because then the recordings look really, really good. The color's still a little bit muted. It's not going to be as good as Riverside FM, but if you even just email support and get a 720p account, it's going to look pretty good. Or get a Zoom Facebook portal and bump up the res to at least 1280 by 720. You'd be surprised at how good it is.
Yeah, the kit is important. Sending out a kit that someone, and we send them out with Mac Minis so that we don't have, that the user doesn't have to do anything other than that, and so especially when they're non-techie, like here's how we built these little things that literally we had almost anybody that is non-techie put them together, and we send out little ones and big ones. That's going to make a huge difference. But we are testing Riverside and FM, and I don't know if I can talk about the other one we're testing, but it's pretty impressed. So I saw a test yesterday that we'll show all of you soon, but it was the most stunning video across the web that I've ever seen. So and I don't say that lightly. It's a desktop app, not a web app, and it's a thing. So anyway, we'll talk about more about that in the not too distant future. Next question.
Michael Drosty here in the panel out of Peoria, Illinois, says iZotope RX9 audio repair cleaning tool came out today. Anyone upgrading or using this?
We should get those guys on and have them talk about it. I mean, it'd be fun I'm a fan of their work. I haven't used the new one though. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, the little controversy in the audio world. They went to subscription model, and a lot of people were upset. And now they've gone back to selling upgrades. Mm-hmm. But I use it to clean lead vocals a lot in audio production. I was curious if other people here used it a lot or not.
It's probably the most. I don't have RX9. I think I have RX7 or something like that. I haven't upgraded, but it's the most valuable set of tools that I use to fix things. so it's. I mean, when it comes to audio, if I need to fix audio, that along with I've talked Zenaptics are the two that I've used the most. Unveil is in Zenaptics. Anyway, Zenaptics. Those are the two that I've used the most to clean things up that needed when it absolutely positively had to be fixed. Next question.
Comes from Richard Lavery in Belfast, and he says, is it worth moving away from the term live streaming and just call it broadcast?
Go ahead, Grant.
I think it's a fascinating question because it goes into this whole area of virtual events or digital first events, because we've had live streaming for so long now, and it kind of has just been broadcast. But I think in terms of skipping broadcast as well and going into digital first, where we're thinking more about engagement, and so ultimately there's a bit more going on than just a live stream. And I think I like to use the term for people sometimes when it's, I think of that for hybrid. You're not really talking about a hybrid event. You're just talking about a normal event with a live stream. And that I think normalizes it for them where they're like, oh yeah, because we're not really engaging with that online audience in the same way that we are in person. And so I'm using live stream as an old term now. And I think kind of broadcast is a little bit as well. And now we're thinking in terms of how are we doing digital events, digital first events, and how are we building the community and community first event?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I think that broadcast is so tied up to the over-the-air transmitter on top of mountains industry. I would argue for netcast, because that's basically what it is. You're just directly going out into the internets. I think that is more accurate than webcast. It doesn't have to be the web. There's so many things, but there is a network involved always. And broadcast is kind of taken. That's the only reason I think it's kind of would be confusing for a while.
Yeah. And sorry, some breaking news came in. We'll sign it in a second. Go ahead, John.
So this is an interesting question. We've had long discussions about this. Leo tried netcast and he failed. He admitted it's his defeat on calling netcast. I started in this business before the word streaming was the word, because you either had a progressive download and then streaming was the protocol for direct connection, but all bits just flowing down the internet. I'm not a fan of streaming. I don't like the word.
Go ahead, Courtney.
And as evidenced by the approaching strike threats, the unions would rather use broadcast because that's what they want equity with as far as wages. And so, because contracts are written using that term, and netcasts or streaming live to a large audience is now the same as broadcast or cable television was. And so for union and legal reasons, it might be wise to adopt that.
I often think of it as online events. When people ask me what I do, I said, well, I design complex online events. That's kind of the process. But I also think about what we do here, and the thing that I'm always trying to get to is what I call a scalable conversation. So a scalable conversation is kind of how I think about it, is how do we include lots and lots and lots of people into the conversation. So interactivity is kind of the key to that. I just tweeted it out. The announcement is that Sound Devices has joined Audiotonics, which is the group of companies is Allen and Heath, Calrec, Digico, Digigrid, Group One, Clang Technologies, and SSL. So Sound Devices is now part of the big one. so anyway, that just came out a couple minutes ago. So anyway, we'll see if we can drag John on sometime in the near future and talk more about it.
That's an injection of cash, right?
Well, I think that it gives them scale. Like they can, and it gives, I think it gives all of the companies access to. And I don't know what they're going to do with it, but when I look at it from the outside, it gives everybody access to the Sound Devices technologies that they figured out now can end up, in some of those other pieces. But it also gives all that technology back, and it also means that they have more flexibility to, make choices that they may not be able to make at the size that they were, but now they have almost an unlimited size to do things.
Allen and Heath now with noise assist.
Well, yeah, that is, yes, yeah, noise assist across many things could be really interesting. Yeah. So anyway, it'll be interesting to see. We'll see if we can get those guys on and talk more about it when they're ready. But that announcement just came out a couple minutes ago. We'll answer 2 more questions, then we'll jump into the second hour. Next question.
First one of those 2 is Douglas Carmichael's, and he says, I found this short documentary about the classic DV Garage 3D toolkit, and has a link there. Could the toolkit concept have a future within the office hours organization as it grows?
I think that we have a different version of that when we look at how we're dealing with Isadora, how we're dealing with here to record and mix effect, where things may not be completely free, but they're not very expensive, and you can all play with it together, and we're all learning that. I think that when the thing to remember about the 3D toolkit, which I created, is that at the time, I don't remember what the price was, but I think at the time, electric image was somewhere between $2,000 and $5,000 or $7,000 a unit. So the chances of getting into it, the argument that we made at the time was that right at the time, the only way to learn this was to get a job in the industry, which you couldn't get until you knew how to use it, or to steal it in some way, shape, or form. And people would steal 3D Studio and Maya and other things, and they would, they were able to, and the reality is most of us realized that the companies were kind of wink, wink, nod, nod. Like they knew that as soon as you became successful, you didn't want to get sued. So you didn't want to, get caught. And so you would legalize, or a company would legalize, they would pay for it. And they weren't after selling $3,000 products to individual users. And so they just let it, they just didn't know, they didn't have a model, to let individual users, kind of figure that out. And so, that's how we kind of, got the 3D toolkit. I don't have the numbers. I've been told by people in that summer of 2001 that the overall sales, when the 3D toolkit came out, the overall sales of we sold thousands of them, and the overall sales of 3D dropped by 30% across that summer. So it definitely had an impact on a lot of people paid attention to it. It was not, you wouldn't tell people that, I'm using the 3D toolkit for work, but it did provide people a tool that they could absolutely, it's the same, it was literally the same piece of software that I used for Star Wars. So it was not, it was definitely capable of very high quality, and they were about to put it to pasture, which is why I was able to do that, because they were coming out with their new version, which I admit I didn't like. So I didn't like the version that was coming out. And so, so I was like, well, let me keep the good, I didn't say it this way to them, but let me keep the good one and make that available with training. And you can keep on going with the one that I don't like. So anyway, so it I think overall it gave a lot of people an opportunity that they wouldn't have had. And it definitely helped us launch the idea of doing that. But yeah, anyway, that's a little overview there. Next question.
Chris Widener has our last one in the regular queue, and he says, has anyone looked at Backpack Studio's new 2.0 release with the participant recording? Is this just another WebRTC solution, he wonders?
Oh, no, it looks really cool. I'm just looking at the, I don't know how, it's something that we should definitely test. This is definitely something to play with. It looks like a slick little app to do participant recording. I think it's for audio, not for video, but maybe not. I don't, yeah, have to look at it a little bit more, but it looks like a cool app. All right. So, let's jump into the second hour. And we've got some questions starting to stack up, and let's push that. And we're just going to crowd movement, I think we'll call it, crowd management. Anyway, so let's go ahead. And, one of the things we want to talk about here is there's a lot that a lot of us sometimes will say and sometimes won't, that we do to make sure that the crowd has the best experience, and that it's a manageable experience. And some of this translates, I'm talking about physical stuff. We can also talk about virtual as well. It doesn't have to be limited to that, but there's a lot of things that you do. And the question is how do you create an environment in which the event goes smoothly, that the audience has a great experience, and that they have certainty, like that things can get out of hand really quickly if people are confused, or if people, don't respond effectively, and so a lot of times sometimes you're doing things overt, but of course, when you're dealing with large crowds, you can't do that. You really need to build a system that is going to have them be successful, in what they're doing. And so because you can't have a person wandering around for 15,000 people asking them to take their seat. So you have to figure out little ways to try to at least flatten that curve so that you're not completely managing it by, manually. So a lot of, I talked about, I think where this second hour came, someone posted it in the second hour to talk about it, but one of the techniques that I used to run the technical for a lot of seminars, and not huge seminars, but a couple hundred people for each one. And I would do it a couple times a week for a while. And one of the things we found really effective was that I brought in, it was one of those things, it wasn't something I learned from there. I was like, oh, let's try this thing. And then it worked really well, which was, this was in the early 90s, that we would slowly raise the volume of the music. We'd start playing music about 20 minutes before the show started. We'd slowly raise that volume until you almost were yelling. It was really loud. You weren't yelling, but it was you had to raise your voice to stay over it. And you're slowly but it was very, very slow. You just slowly work it up. And then about 2 minutes before the event started, we just turn it off. Not bring it down slowly. It would just go off. And it was amazing. Everyone just sat down. Oh, this is the time. Because it felt uncomfortable to be there, to be standing. Suddenly it was silent. It was okay, I'm going to go take my seat. And we have 3 or 4 stragglers out of 200, but it was a pretty effective, thing to do. Other things that we would do, and people are asking a couple questions, and if the panelists want to say something, just raise your hand of how you manage some of this stuff. But the other things that we would do is we would have this little thing as people as they walked in, we would just say, in a seminar, for instance, we would just say, hey, welcome here. Try to find the frontmost, centermost seat. And we just say that all the time, frontmost, centermost seat. And a lot of people would just ignore us and they'd sit in the back or whatever. But there's a fair number of people that would, it wasn't something they did the first time, but after a while they kind of did that, and it allowed us to fill the room more effectively. So, because what you don't want when you start a seminar is holes, because then people have to step in front of other people to get into the seat, like latecomers. You want all the latecomers to end up in the back. And so you'd want to try to fill all the seats. We manage things as holes per 100. How many holes did we have per 100 people in the thing? And so we would measure ourselves by how that worked. When you look at good management inside of a very large event, let's say 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, clear signage, super important. And you can always tell someone who's done this a lot and someone who hasn't, is how much signage there is to tell you where to go. No one should ever be standing anywhere and not know where the proper direction is, ever. In one of those things, there should always be some way to see, this is they should be able to look around like this and orient themselves, to where they're supposed to go. And that can be a really, complicated thing. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, a couple of experiences that I've had, and one is I used to do some bigger shows with younger, teenagers, and so the thing that would happen is often it was like concert type environment, and one of the problems would be is that you'd have there'd be all rowdy. They'd be super into it. They'd probably end with a really up song. And the problem is if you then leave it like that, then they're all just kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Whereas, so the background music at that point is key. The selection of that music is super key. And so, I would have people that were super annoyed at me because I'd be playing kind of subdued, kind of just like chill music at the end, and it just kind of brought this thing down where they just gently went out. Like they just slowly go out, and it completely changed that culture. But as far as another example of moving large people around, I think of Disneyland. Like when I lived in
I
LA
wish Roscoe was here, because the Disneyland is the ultimate version of that.
I love how they're constantly refining the ways that they will move people in and out, and so I lived in LA for 3 years, and I'm young kid, so I went to Disneyland 60 something times, and so but the bigger shows with those with the larger sort of auditorium and the outside ones and things, how they manage having people go in and then very quickly out, and even things like the Fantasmic, where they can have 30,000 people around that water, but it's all clearly sectioned. It's managed so carefully, and there's often the rushing of people trying to get those spots, but it's so managed incredibly well with seemingly a small amount of staff, and it's just a lot of practice and a lot of tweaking, and knowing what groups of people do.
Yeah, I got to spend some time with some folks at Disney. I was doing a job at Disneyland, and so we got into the kick. They said, "Well, do you take your kids to Disneyland?" That was the first question. I was like, "No, I like my kids in crowds," because my kids were really small, like 2 or 3 years old, and I was like, I'm afraid I'm going to lose them. And he said, "There's no safer place than Disney. like there's no Disneyland is like the safest place you can take your kids." And I was like, "But what happens? How often? And I said, well, how do you find them if the kids get away? And they said, well, there's no place other than the bathrooms and the employee sections that aren't under camera. You don't see it, but the entire thing is under camera." And he goes, "And we can forward and rewind at will. So if you come and say, 'I lost my kid,' we go find out where you were. We find you in the video. Or if we find a lost kid, we just rewind all the way through. We just follow them around all the way back to when they were with their parents. And then we follow the parents forward until we find where the parents are. And then we just match them up." And it was a very quick, like, this is how we do that. And I said, "Well, how often do you have to do that?" And he goes, 150, 160 times a day. Like it's like the scale. That's like it's not like it happened every once in a while and they had to figure it out. They do it all the time, and so they, it's a different scale. And some of the things where people jump out and start to do a thing on the streets, that's crowd control. They're slowing the crowd down from going somewhere else because there's too many people in one place or another. So a lot of the distractions that they create are things that are designed, to slow you down, a little bit. And yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I've done a couple of big jobs over the course of my life where I've had a lot of crowd control experience. One of them was the Super Meet in Las Vegas, because we had a couple of thousand people are going to come in. And it turned out to be a different kind of environment to the other one I did, which was a beer festival for a charity fundraiser that I did for about 6 or 7 years. And I was the chairman of the committee for 3 or 4. And that was a process of getting 3,000 or 4,000 people into an outdoor event safely, securely, doing the ID checks and the rest of that. And some of the notes that are top of mind from the lessons that I learned for there. At the Super Meet, it was in a big ballroom in Las Vegas, and the most important tool I ended up having was a bullhorn. Literally just something that I could communicate with large groups of people really easily to say the show will start in 3 or 4 minutes. You can do it with a light trick if they're all in one circumstance or volume changes, but that means you have to have some kind of PA or broadcast system. So some kind of let me talk to the crowd and give them an instruction when they need it became hugely important to me. On the beer festival thing, the most important thing for me was looking at ingress and choke points, because every time we tried to get those 5,000 or 3,000 people into the event in a short period of time, because they all wanted to go in there and start their event, anytime there was a choke point, I had to design an exception process where if somebody had lost their wallet or they couldn't find their purse or they had some issue, we needed to get them out of that line, take them someplace else so the main thing could continue to flow. Because you get 3 or 4 lines out of 6 that are choked, and you just really throw down your efficiency of getting people in. So exceptions handling is something you have to think about a lot. And the last thing I think is the most important. In both of those cases, at the Super Meet and in the beer festival, I would make sure that I or somebody high up in the organization was at the point where people were starting, and I would go out and be a cheerleader. I would try to set a tone of very positive. We're so glad you came. Hey, thank you for coming. We're going to have fun today. Everything psychological you do to put them in a good mood coming into things, and this was particularly important in the beer festival because people are going to be drinking all day long, follows through. It lowers the number of angry people so much if they've been welcomed and feel positive about that. So that also works back into that announcement system, because if whoever's your announcer, instead of growling at people or even being neutral, is, hey, we're so glad you're here. I got one more note for you. And just be positive. What comes down from the top really does spread out through group events.
Right.
So make sure your people are really good at that.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, I was getting back to Disney. Disney has a whole division, for crowd control and metering the flow of guests through a theme park and through an event. I remember, and you'll not realize it at all. Like in the Living Sea and Disney World, there are these elevators that they take you in. You wait for the elevator in line. They got things to entertain you in the line before you take the elevator, and the elevator pretends to take you down underneath the sea. But that elevator is just a metering device. They're not taking you anywhere. They're closing the doors and keep you. It holds a specific number of people, and they know exactly how many people are coming in versus exactly how many people have gone out. And since it's a free time, you can roam around within that particular event and look at different things. Your time is not metered on the inside, but they meter the people going out, and they slow down the elevators for the people coming in to prevent it from being overcrowded in the middle, where the time is open and not there's not a specific show that takes a certain length of time to get in and out. And if there is a show, they always have separate input doors and output doors, so they never bring people in the same doors, and that way they can exchange the crowd very quickly.
Yeah, in security areas, by the way, we always have we have to have egress. Two points have to be available. Sometimes not more. Like sometimes it's we want to know exactly how many points you can do to get into the room, but there always has to be 2. Like I know that for heads of state, it's always 2. It's always like minimum of two in and out. Before that, you can't have 1. One of the things that I find is overlooked a lot of times is giving people something to do for time before the event. You want to give them a reason to come in early and a reason to sit down early. And so pre-show, that's how, getting that energy up and giving them something. Like if you go to David Letterman, when I went to David Letterman to watch, sit in the audience. I was there in New York. I figured I'll go to David Letterman show. It's a long line. You sit there and wait. But once you sit down, number one, it's really cold. Just in case you're wondering, super cold. And number 2 is that it is, and I'll talk about that in a second, but number 2 is that they have people come out all the time. They're doing little announcements. Then they have a comedian that comes out and talks to you a little beforehand. Then David Letterman comes out and says hi to you. So you want to be there early. You want to be seated. You want to be part of that because it's all part of the experience. It's an extra experience before the event. And the more you can create that, and that's both an online thing. We do that in online events. We take that and we make sure that we want things for them to do whenever we can. And clients sometimes just can't think of what they would do, so they don't do anything. But like with Salesforce is a good example. We would have a pre-show for 20 minutes that was Peter Coffey asking people questions and doing all the stuff. And Peter Coffey is really good at stretching. So if we were running a little over, we would just literally someone would sit there behind the camera going like this, just keep going, and so sometimes we stretch for 20 minutes. So, but I think that that pre-show made a huge difference in making sure that our systems are working, make sure that the edges, and giving people a reason to be there. And that is, I think, something we've taken from the physical world and gone into the into the virtual world. By the way, temperature is a massive deal. Like you can always tell people who've done lots of events, they pay a lot of attention to room temperature. And typically, the target temperature for me on an empty room with 200 people or more is 64 degrees when you walk in, or 18 degrees, I think is Celsius or whatever. I want it to be cold when you walk in, because I know that there's these little portable heaters that are all about to come in and move that temperature up by about 5 degrees, and you can make those calculations and everything else. But we tried to generally keep the temperature about 67, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That's when we find people, if you get any colder, people get uncomfortable, but if you get any warmer, they fall asleep. so that's so we pay a lot of attention to temperature. And I can always tell when people don't, that they haven't done this very much, because it's just devastating. A hot room, and what the problem is, once you get behind the room, like once it's 72 degrees with 2,000 people, you're done. Like you can't, in most facilities, you can't catch up again. You'll lose your entire session. You might be able to get it by the end of the day, but it takes a long time to move it, because you're competing with 1,000 heaters that are sitting there generating heat that you're fighting against. Let's jump into some of the questions, and we'll come back to general discussion.
Absolutely. First one comes from Douglas Carmichael. Oh wait, that's left over from the last one. No, that's crowd movement. Yeah. Okay. Could strategically developed graphics on large displays be a useful crowd management or movement tool? What software tools could manage outputting different graphics to different displays for that purpose?
Good, Stuart.
I was going to mention that John Preto would be ideal for this, how he's talked to us before about the big screens on buildings and what have you, but go one step further than that. With all the VR stuff that we've got coming, being able to stream messages about that sort of motion into those devices for people to use is also another way to pass that information out to people. You've got to think of the crowd in two ways. One is individuals who are smart, but as a crowd that as a collective is not smart and will move as an organism as a whole by themselves. So yes, as much information as you can, but it's got to be very clear and it's got to be very easy to follow.
Grant?
Yeah, I think that signage works for individuals who are lost. But to Stuart's point, people are in large groups of people are like sheep. And so once again, Disneyland's a good example of that. When it is that a show finishes and they're controlling where that crowd goes, it'll be really clear. Those first few people, they're directing those first few people really clearly, and then all the other people will just follow them. And they're not looking at signs at that point, right? It's just everyone will just be, I guess we're going this way, and everyone just goes, and everyone's and then there's a bunch of families with strollers in the way. The key with getting through a crowd with strollers is you just don't stop. If you've got a stroller, you just keep moving. You never stop. If you stop, you stop for 10 minutes. So that's the key as a dad who knew how to drive that stroller.
Yeah, I one of my jobs working for Sony was Sony Music. I'd be bringing music directors and other people into a venue, and the band's starting up, and I have to get them to the front. They've been out drinking backstage. So the crowd's in there. So we've all been hanging out with the band. We come out of backstage, and now they want to be in the front row, or in the pit or wherever that is. And I will say, this isn't about crowd control, but I was exceptional at, you just turn sideways and lower your shoulder and literally just aim for all the gaps between people, and you just kind of push, and I would just literally just push. I just hold onto my hand and I would just pull them all right through as a little train, and then set them all up where they needed to be, because that was my job. It was like, we'll just get this done. Anyway, but one of the things that, to your point though, is that I think people understaff a lot, and I don't think people also understand what it takes to do that. In a large event, like a Dreamforce or something like that, there are literally hundreds of people there for days, that are getting trained. They're being told where all the egresses are, where the bathrooms are, where all the things and they know what those questions are, what questions people ask. And you can't, in a well-organized event, there is no time when you can't look around and see a person that is clearly marked as someone that's staff. And you'll see the staff and you'll get used to it, that you can walk up to them and ask them a question and they know where to send you. And that is like, that's a ninja thing, you know, is to have people that are there, whether they're volunteers or whether they're paid staff, and they're not highly paid staff, you know, to do this. But they're, and like a place like Moscone in San Francisco, there's just staff that you hire for that. You know, like they do that all the time. So they know the building really well. And then some of them are actual content experts, but a lot of them just know the space, you know, really well. And they get hired to do that thing. Go ahead, Bill.
I just wanted to add one more note. This is pretty obvious the second time, but the first time I've seen so many people make this mistake, they'll bring in some sort of display, but they'll put it at eye level, and eye level with a crowd of 100 in a room is unseeable. If you can't, if you have any kind of signage, put it up high enough so regardless of how many people and how tall they are, get in front of it, people can still see it clearly.
And you want to be careful about what people can see as well. People put great things on LED walls at choke points, and then they really get themselves in trouble because everyone wants to stop and look at the video. So where you put interesting things are places where there's an enormous amount of flow, you know, so like a good, for anyone who's been to San Francisco, that going in the North Hall, going down the escalators, there's this massive wall, but there's tons of flow, and it's a great place to put schedules, to put interesting videos, to put branding, all kinds of other stuff, because everybody who wants to go down has to go down those escalators, and they sit there and look at it, and you're able to give them all this information all at one time. And there's literally there have been, in some of the events that we've done, they know how long it takes. If you don't walk down the escalator, this is how long it will, this is how long you have on the escalator, and the graphics will loop once inside of that time frame. Like their time frame is that minute and a half. I don't remember what it is, but I think it was something like 70 seconds or 80 seconds or something to take you from the top to the bottom, and that's how long the loop is. You know, so that you see everything they want to show you, and there's a lot of discussion about what to put in there and what to take out based on, you know, they have to fit inside that window. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, you touched just on what I was going to say. In events where you cannot enter the event until they open the doors, for example, so you're holding the audience outside the event, entertaining information on video screens placed about digital signage is great, and you can show red carpet interviews, things like that. But as soon as the doors open, all of those screens have to shift to now seating, nothing that would hold your attention more than 2 or 3 seconds, because you'll create choke points and stop the crowd from coming in if you don't immediately indicate that, okay, it's time to stop looking at this stuff and move in and take your seat.
One thing that we've had to deal with is mags, you know, the magnetometers that you have. So in some of the stuff we deal with, we deal with magnetometers or mags, and little thing, length of the tables makes a huge difference in the line. Like this is the secret to mags. 2 6-foot tables before, well, this is mags, going through mags and metal detectors. So if you have a metal detector, 2 6-foot tables minimum. Everyone does this thing where they have the edge of the thing out there, but giving people, it's 1 6-foot table if it's just a mag, 2 6-foot tables if they're going to run through an X-ray. And the reason for that is that if they go through the X-ray, they need more time. You're stacking them up with somewhere to put their stuff while they put it into the thing, and it literally, the table doubles, like an extra table, like doubles the speed, because they're now working on it before they get through to the X-ray, and anyway. It was an experiment that was done, and wow, that really I read it somewhere, and then we put it in, and it was really useful. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back again with, could technology like Amazon's open source distance assistance be used to enforce physical distancing at event sites?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I find is there's lots of things on the floor that you can put there that people will just follow. People are funny about that. You add some lines and people will just naturally stay. A lot of them will, not all of them, but just lines on the floor, and people will just start following them like little lanes. You know, it's kind of an amazing thing. You always get a couple. And what's funny, just so you know, if you step out of those lines, security pays attention to you more forever. Like they, you know, you're now a troublemaker. they're like, so they'll create these little lines, and there'll be a handful of people that always don't want to walk in those lines, and they don't want to be part of it. But you're now inside of a like the security guard. Anytime he sees you, will look at what you're doing, and you're not like you're dangerous, but like you're the person that's going to do something that they don't expect. Like as soon as you step off those lines, you become a target of, you know, you're someone that is going to do something unusual, like go down a hallway you're not supposed to be in, or go into a room you're not supposed to be in, and everything else, and they just start paying attention, to you. So if it's not the end of the world, I've done it, but you just want to know that as a person in the crowd, it's their job to identify and preempt when possible you doing something just out of the ordinary. Because a lot of one person gets out of the ordinary, and then they, like Grant was talking about, when one person goes the right way, everyone follows them. Same if someone goes the wrong way, everyone starts to follow them. Or if someone, so that's that is an issue. Next question.
What are some strategies for resolving conflicts when managing crowds?
Go ahead, John.
So I was the CTO of a local video surveillance company here 15, 16 years ago. The video surveillance systems now are just big LANs, right? They're just encoders and big LANs, which is stuff we've been working on for 20 years. And so in the casinos, they've had tracking systems. They track all the movement. First of all, they track all the license plates coming into property that park on property. That's fed over to Metro Police to look up that license plate. And then they do tracking inside the casinos to monitor flow with density maps. And so this tells them where people are walking and how they're navigating throughout the casino, and they lay out the games appropriately. This is just two examples. There's tons and tons of other examples of how they're using AI in the casinos to do all kinds of crazy stuff. They do facial recognition, they do card recognition, they do all kinds of interesting stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Bill?
So we had a couple of stealthy things, but the beer festival was an interesting thing because obviously people are going to be drinking. We had a big designated driver program, so we did a lot of things to ameliorate any risk there. But when I had a problem up at the front, my first thing was when they called somebody as a supervisor over to take care of it was, I can see you're feeling really bad about that. We do have a VIP section. Would you come with me and let's take a look at that? I wasn't actually taking him to the VIP section. What I had was my uniformed officers who were part of the part over by that. And by just removing this problem, this potential escalating situation from the middle of a crowd where everybody's watching them to a quiet area with a few uniformed policemen that are adjacent, they're 6 feet away, so I could talk them through their problem and see if we could resolve it. And that if they needed to be ejected, there was a gate right there and we could get it. So you want to de-escalate, move them away from things so it doesn't become bigger.
And we did something similar. We've done that in similar events but we didn't say that they were going to take them to a VIP section. We just told them, I totally get what you're talking about. Let me take you to someone who can make who can do something about it. Now that someone who could do something about it was generally security, and so, but I just said, I totally, and I can't do anything about this. I can't make that decision, but I can take you to someone who can, and let me help you with that. And we would take them out. And then after that we would, and to Bill's thing, you always want someone to leave with a positive, you don't want someone to feel like they got kicked out. So you just want to get them into a quiet space where they're not in front of a lot of people, and then you want to figure out what's going on and figure out how you can again de-escalate it and see if we can make it work. But sometimes you can make a decision pretty quickly as to whether they're fit to return, especially at concerts, or beer fests or whatever. It may not be the right place for them at that point. It may not be good for them or anybody else. Next question.
Rob Collins from Kansas City, Missouri says, would knowing any of these crowd control tricks make them break or fail, or do you think seeing it would get you to where you're going before the rest of the group?
Go ahead, Grant.
I think that there is generally freedom found in the boundaries. And what I mean by that is that when people come into an environment that's managed well, then there is all this amount of freedom. Sit wherever you want, but don't go out here. Don't go pushing on the fire exit door. Don't go up on the stage. It's just clear. And the same as when you exit, okay, we're using these doors. This is the way that we're going out. And as soon as you're in a badly managed environment, people are going out exits, and so I saw that person go out there. That must be a quicker way, and that must be a quicker way, and it's just mayhem. Right. When it's managed well, there's the boundaries. I always think of boundaries as a fish in a fishbowl. You take a fish out of the fishbowl with no boundaries, it doesn't work, right? It's flopping around all over the place. You put the fish back in the boundaries and they love it. They're just going around in that bowl and they're enjoying it. And so I think there's freedom in the boundaries.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, it is. It's a carrot and stick thing. I use the VIP thing because we had tickets that were far more expensive for that, and everybody wanted to try to figure out how to get into it. So it was something I knew would just click in their minds. But this is the whole thing is this tonality thing. The other thing that I started doing in year 2 that I think really had an impact was I would go to the exit points. And we would do the same thing that I had done coming in. We were very welcoming to people going in, and we were very welcoming as the last thing they saw as they left. And that was all about, now they've been having fun at the event. They had a great time. And now I say, I hope we see you again next year. Please come back. If there's anything we can do to make your experience better, I'll talk to you about it for 2 minutes. This whole environmental thing is huge. It's just how you treat people. Your event gets a reputation for being a positive, enjoyable event.
And it's really, big event companies really understand what we're talking about, and they spend a lot of time, and they understand like what it takes to get this done and what it takes to make it work. And that experience of people being frustrated because the line's too long and there's nowhere to go, they can't find the bathrooms, they can't find in, they're lost. These are all stress cases that have people not have a great experience, and it spreads through the entire crowd. like it's a virus that emotionally spread. When people are frustrated and you see people frustrated, then you're more likely to get frustrated. And so all of this stuff is super important. And you can always tell, like little organizations that do a couple hundred people and that's all they've ever done, they don't think much of it. And then they have an event that has 2,000 and the whole thing falls apart and people are angry and frustrated because they didn't think about the scale, and what people are going to do in those things. As far as knowing about it, I think the one thing that you're good at if you know about it is you know how to get in. Like you know how porous an event is because you wander in and I can get if I really wanted to, I can probably get the front row of almost anything. If with just some thought, confidence, it goes a long way in being able to just show up in places. Now, I don't do that anymore. I used to. I remember we were doing barbecue or something for a Jimmy Buffett show, and we were outside. I was working. I was a waiter at the time, but I'd worked in the music industry for a long time. And someone was like, "Oh, it'd be really good to be in the to actually watch Jimmy Buffett." And so we were there 10 minutes, and we were we watched a couple shows, a couple songs in the fourth row, and then went back. And it was just. It's also why I don't go to very many of these because from a security perspective, I find that to be frightening. That anybody can just kind of work their way through with confidence. So that said, what I really learned overall is that whether you're getting on a flight or going to an event or whatever, there are many subjective things that people can do. You're dealing with human beings, and when you're great with them, there's a lot of things that go your way. When you don't break the rules, when you stay inside the lines in an event, when you are great with them, and even if things are trouble, you have a smile on your face, even when you're trying to figure something out, when you're not complaining to them, there's all kinds of extra things that people can do for you that they will not do when you're a pain, And so I think that the number one thing that I learned from doing events on over and over and over again is how being a great person, being a great participant, get you all kinds of things. I've had extra drinks and extra this and extra that, and I get to go to this special place, and I know all the things about it, and I have these great conversations, and I have all of that just because I come in with a smile, and I don't make things harder, because they're already dealing with lots of people, and this is especially when you're dealing with hotels and everything else, but just being appropriate and being great. That's the number one thing I learned from doing all these things, is just being a great participant really gets you a lot. And you don't know where it's going to happen, but you get the benefit of the doubt all the time, because you were already, set up a good experience. So, next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana, notes that in classic Barnum style, P.T. Barnum put up signs that said "this way to the egress." Is it possible to achieve the same effect with directional sound?
You probably could. You probably have speakers that tell people where to go, and then they would look over there. But sometimes it can be hard in an event because of delays and because of reflection and everything else. It's hard to figure out where things are coming from sometimes. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, you could put speakers outside the event to control egress. It sounds like a concert that's happening outside the event on the street, and so people will be going out to see what's happening there. Or if they're in a waiting room or milling around in the lobby of a theater or so on, you could have sound coming from the stage that sounds like, "Hey everybody, welcome to so it sounds like the show is starting,
right,
without sounding like an announcement of 10 minutes till the show starts.
Yeah. Bill?
I always took that story as a little bit the opposite of good customer service, because I always took it as he was assuming that the rubes coming to the carnival wouldn't know what egress meant, and they would think they were seeing another example of an exotic animal and find themselves outside the gate and not able to get back in a shorter time than they would have spent there. I always thought remembering to be respectful of the people who are buying tickets is one of the key elements. Yes, they get out of hand. Yes, they do goofy things, but I always counseled everybody, this, you probably saw them on their worst moment. There may be something that happened at home. Be nice to them, take care of them, make it a positive thing, and that'll be much faster than trying to manipulate them into doing something that might not be in their own best interest.
Go ahead, Grant.
I think when I'm thinking about exits, I think about IKEA, right? And you think about the shortcuts that you want to take through that place. And they have those little doors. It's never shorter. It's like, I'm like, I thought I would win it. I knew it. I knew the system. I knew the map. You don't know the map. You go through that door, and you're back where you were, and you just stick to the path. Go through what they want you to go through, and you'll end up in the marketplace. You'll be all right. But the other thing I think about with exits, coming back to Disneyland again, this is really fascinating. When they, how they close the park and then it's still open for another hour. So everything's, all the shops are open. You never get this feeling like you're being pushed out. And you would think, and I think lots of big venues and places do this wrong. And that's where they start sweeping and they start pushing everyone out. And it just upsets people.
Right.
But Disneyland knows that when they close all their rides down and they keep all their shops open, they're going to get a whole bunch of merchandise that's sold. But also there's just never is this feeling of you're being pushed, and it just feels so much nicer. Yeah. Just they know it's an extra hour, and it just creates a way nicer environment.
And for them, it's not an extra hour. It's just the other hour. It's the other hour that's there. I think that's the big thing that happens. Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, two thoughts cross my mind. One, we used to rent, do large events in Orlando at their hotel. So you would get one of those theme parks as part of the package. I remember having dinner in Epcot with, I don't know, a couple of thousand people. And they said, don't worry, after dinner, there won't be anybody in the theme park. And it was just so matter of fact, give us half an hour, place will be empty. The other interesting thing is be careful of the technology. The armbands that people use in Disney, the passes. I used to work for a company that was the technology behind some of that. It's a credit card system. There are so many transactions. They required a credit card engine actually to cover that number. And that technology was fully redundant because it can't not work. So you've got to make sure you've planned your security and the rest of these things for that sort of, technology.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Next question.
Roscoe Jones from the panel here says, how do you handle security, and do you ever use bouncers?
Yeah, go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I think about this in terms of I worked in a hotel, was an AV staff in a hotel for a couple of years. And so I did lots of gala dinners and things like that, big ballroom dinners and things like that. And so there was always dancing and drinking, and it'd go on until, midnight or 1 a.m. or things. And so often there'd be some craziness that would go on. The interesting thing is that while the hotel would have security staff that would poke their heads in every now and again, really the security was the responsibility of the staff that were in the room. And I still play this role when, I'm standing behind the sound desk or the vision mixer or whatever, and you're there for hours. You're part of that greater team with the banquet staff and the, whoever else that are there, and your eyes and ears, and you're keeping on, alert. And I see it often where there's the dude that's babysitting the sound desk, and he's on his phone and he's half asleep, Whereas when you play that role actively, you're doing the sound actively, and you're also your security, and you're the information guy, and you're the someone that people come up and ask, where can I charge my phone? Can I plug that into here?
That's always the thing. Yeah. By the way, charging the phones is a thing that we took really seriously. So a lot of our events, we would have maybe 100 places to charge your phone, because we built like really cool little things with little cables coming out that were micro USB and lightning and all kinds of other things. But one thing we were really careful of actually was that it only went into power, and then we really secured that power, and we check it a couple times a day to make sure that no one put anything in between. Because we didn't promise that, but we wanted to make sure. We were at a lot of information conferences that we wanted to make sure that no hackers would stick something in between. And so we generally we super glued them, in there. So like this was the only time we were going to use this system, was that, to make sure that there was no way to hack the back of it. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, as somebody who used to have a security license for Victoria, never call them bouncers. They're crowd control security professionals. Bouncers is something that the industry has basically tried to get away from because it's a negative connotation about the sort of people who pick people up and throw them out of a venue. And there's a whole heap of stuff with duty of care of like getting people in and out. There's a lot of training and a lot of work goes into making sure people are educated enough to do that job. So yeah, don't ever use the term bouncers. But yes, the rule in Victoria was for security and crowd control, 2 security officers for the first 50 people, and then another one for every 50 after that. So you quickly get to where you do need crowd controllers at an event.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
And for the beer festival, we had a tiered approach. The first tier was a hired security firm. They were in uniform. They were at the front. They had 2 tasks. The first task was to check bags and things coming and make sure they weren't bringing in alcohol or firearms or whatever. And then the second job was to check the ID, which is now a swipe on any kind of an official ID. It takes a second. But the fact that ID check takes a short period of time, now you have to affix a wristband for an alcohol event. That actually takes 4 to 5 times longer than any of the other first 2 things. So we would have at least 4, possibly 5 wristbanders. We would put it on them, never hand it to them, because it was really easy to pocket and then throw it through the gate or pass it through the chain link fence. Once they are wristbanded, they go in. That was handled by the commercial, but then inside the perimeter of the event, we had off-duty police in uniform, and they handled any circumstance that came up inside the perimeter of the gate. We wouldn't leave that in a private firm. We would have sworn law enforcement officers, because they show up, everything calms down if they're good.
With wristbands, by the way, the ninja skill there is that you make sure your wristband folks don't overlap the sticky ones correctly, which means that they're perfectly line up. And you'll see some people get really good at it, where they'll make sure it lines up so it doesn't get caught in your hair. So the thing is I have a lot of wristbands. I won't let them put them on my wrist. I'll do it right in front of them, but I won't let them do it because they don't line up the edges well. And then I get this little sticky thing pulling on my hair all the time. And I'm always impressed when someone says, "Oh, I'll do it," and then they do it perfectly. It's the little things. Go ahead, Courtney.
This moment in OCD.
Yeah.
The thing I was going to mention, if you are going to have bouncers, as Stuart correctly said, you don't want to call them, have them trained in de-escalation, because everybody around you is carrying a video camera these days, and anything gets out of hand will be on social media before that person is outside the venue. So you got to be careful in behaving properly and trying to de-escalate the situation, which can be tough if you're serving alcohol and drunks are generally unruly and not paying attention.
Yeah, on the largest events that we work on, there's usually, I think it's, beyond what you have when you go through the mags, there are additional non-uniformed outside the venue that are just wandering around looking for trouble. Not looking for trouble, but looking for people that might be trouble, identifying them. And usually that's in conjunction with security cameras. So if they see someone who's acting outside of the normal, that person will just be wandering by. And that's t-shirt, baseball hat kind of thing, like nothing, like totally just around, to see what that looks like. Once you get in there, there's obviously the security as you walk through. Those are uniformed. In the events that we work on, that's the last time you see uniforms. But the folks that are, then there's a layer of just the people helping are all trained to de-escalate. So the people that are giving you directions and everything else, or they're all trained to have a conversation with you. There's another layer of folks that are a little harder, that they're non-uniformed and they're a little harder. They are, they'll have a harder conversation with you, and are capable of, being a little bit forceful, but they're still not going to do it. And then the last layer is the security personnel, and what we work on are generally ex-military, and they can escalate it all the way, So, but what they're really good at is pressure points and arm bars, So that's usually how they handle most of it. Is not in any kind of kinetic thing, but they can grab onto you, and you're going to go where they wanted to go because they're holding onto your arm in a certain way that makes it extremely painful to go some other direction. And that's usually the way they de-escalate things is just with just putting your arm in a certain position or your wrist in a certain position, and holding onto so if they grab onto your arm in the upper part and they grab onto your hand and they turn it and they just hold it that way, you're going to go anywhere they want to go. And so, but they don't show up unless you've gotten through all those other layers. And you can always see, if, I don't know, for people like me, you can always see them because they walk differently. You literally can just see them as they're walking through the thing. They have a certain way of walking. I have a calculation that it's because they wear backpacks a lot, like really heavy gear, that they have a certain way of walking that is, for years, it gives you a different way of walking that you can just tell you can tell who's who when you've watched it enough. But the key is not to get to that point, but they do everything they can not to have those guys have to do anything other than pay attention to egress. It's mostly what you see them at. You see them at things talking about, like before the show, they'll all be talking about, like, okay, this line, this line, this line, this line, this is where you could go. And they're searching every cranny of everything to know where someone could go. And that takes a week of them doing that. Next question.
Next question comes from Stuart Fairweather in Melbourne, and I think he's having fun with us. Writer's question. If your crowd is zombies, what's your preference? Firearm, baseball bat, cricket bat, or chainsaw?
Just run. They're zombies. You're not going to win.
Yeah.
Next question. We're going to move on. We're going to take that one. Go ahead. I don't want to get into violent, whatever. So
Douglas Carmichael's up next. I remember that the French and Asian language announcements at the airport were always done in a female voice. Why would that be?
Go ahead, Stuart.
It's actually emotional, and it's quite simple. Some languages sound more calm in male or female voices, and you always want the crowd to remain calm. Crowds that get anxious or nervous, back to what Grant said about them behaving like sheep, let's just say you need a better sheepdog to keep them under control if they get nervous. But calm crowds follow the rules.
Courtney?
Yeah, what Stuart said, calming, and it sounds less authoritative and demanding if it's a female voice, unless you're used to tuning out your wife. And it also, the frequency response is more audible because it's in the upper mid-range and doesn't get absorbed into a crowd as easily as a male voice does.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana says, I remember light and sound are pretty common with most of us, but have you ever tried other ways such as smell to control or attract crowds? Donut making machines at a booth seem to be really move the crowd.
Go ahead, Bill.
At the beer festivals, we had an array of food vendors, and that area tended to be, we also wanted people eating while they were drinking so that they didn't get quite as intoxicated. But I will say that's interesting, in coming back to the movies, I've noticed that in our area, at least, there are 4 or 5 of the movie places around that have added now physical spray, smell, and things like that. It's a new form of what used to be kind of those high-end movies. The seats move, and I'm looking at trying those out. I'm wondering what they've managed to do now that the pandemic is kind of coming back out, and a lot of these theater things have invested a lot in that. It'll be interesting to see whether the smell-o-vision really works this time.
Go ahead, Grant.
Coffee. Coffee's really good to get a good smell going, particularly in the morning. So we get in early and get the coffee brewing and have that smell all through the event space as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A lot of restaurants and venues exhaust over the what they're cooking on purpose. The idea is they want you to smell it for blocks and get you thinking about it. So it's a very common practice to use smell to move people towards food. Next question.
Juan C. Robles in Mexico says, in case of a hell breaks loose, how do you prepare?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Meetings, lots and lots of meetings, and they will happen in the months before an event. All of this sort of stuff is planned out. Forget about a second hour. You could have a second week just discussing all of the things that go on in those meetings. But it's all about planning well ahead of it.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, what Stuart says, it's experience. You know, if you've done the gig over and over again, you've seen the things that come up. If you're preparing for a hell to break loose at the moment it's breaking loose, you are so far behind the curve.
Yeah.
You've completely lost it.
And once you get over a couple hundred people, you should be hiring professionals. You know, professional teams that know how to do this. They do it all the time. Don't make it up. You know, like it's not. This isn't something you want to try to figure out. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, how would you make the pacifying content on screens intelligible in a high noise environment? Could you feed an LED wall with captions even if the LED processor doesn't have a caption decoder?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Actually, you skip voice altogether. You use something like playing Enya or Brian Eno, music that doesn't have a fast beat or anything like that. So it's calming sounds that just sort of flow over the crowd. The other thing is you stop cutting the visuals as fast. So you use long takes, you use fades, you use things that cause people to slow down. Same as if you are cutting a movie and you want to slow the energy level down, you want to lower people's heartbeat. It's exactly the same techniques.
Also, EEG makes a pass-through system that is, they have a 492, which is something you use in broadcast, but they also have another one. I can't think of what the number is, but it basically passes through and adds captions. So if there's captions on the VANC data, and what the big thing is it'll let you place it anywhere on the screen. So what we do is on LED walls, like we've done ones where we have LED viewings of let's say a keynote, at a campus, and no one's gonna be able to hear it. You don't want to turn it up that loud so that thousands of people can hear it, but you put it across the top, and there's that captioning there. So if they can't hear it, they can see it, and that's it's a I don't know, it's expensive, but it works really well. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, many popular stadium rock tracks like Paul Simon's Boy and the Bubble use drum blasts in the intro as a way to build energy. What other techniques have been used to accomplish the task in a live environment?
It definitely be beats per minute and songs that people know, and you know, those are definitely things that, and volume, you know, are definitely things that you can use. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, how do you manage accessibility needs at events like wheelchair paths and staff trained in the needs of disabled people?
It's a huge conversation. I mean, I think that's probably a whole second hour on its own, but definitely figuring out egress. You have to figure out how someone can get anywhere in the whole location with a wheelchair, you know, and what that's going to actually look like. I actually have a hard out, so I have to. So we'll end there. I want to. You know, it was interesting. I wasn't sure whether this was like really fit into what we're doing. It'll be interesting, but people requested it, and I figured, oh, give it a shot and talk about it a little bit. But I think that those are all things that I think a lot of people, when they go to events, don't think about. You know, that this is the stuff that event folks are thinking about all the time. And so I think it's useful to kind of take a diversion every once in a while and figure out what, talk through some of those things. I want to thank the producers, as always, for great questions, great set of questions, and and our panelists for having a great set of answers and a great little discussion here about events. We probably ought to come back and do another one around digital events. We kind of opened it to that, but there's probably a lot about managing. I think there's a second hour there about managing how people enter digital events and how they're managed and how they go around, and we'll make sure that Grant's available to do that. But let's look at that in the next couple of weeks. We'll do another one that's kind of a follow up to this. All right. So we will now jump into After Hours.